Welcome to the Next Pivot Point podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I will share some insights and ideas from my guest expert, Aubrey Blanche. Together, we will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. Share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to go at it alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we're stronger together. We're best when we are one. So let's meet this week's experts. We have Aubrey Blanche with us, is the math nerd plus empath, director of Equitable Design and Impact at Culture Amp, and a startup investor and advisor. Through all of her work, she seeks to question, reimagine, and redesign the systems and practices that surround us to ensure that all people can access equitable opportunities and build a better world. Her work is undergirded by her training in social scientific methods and grounded in the fundamental dignity and value of every person. Love that. Her personal and professional expertise covers a broad range of equitable enterprise operations, from talent lifecycle programs and accessible product development to event design and communications and media. She's the inventor of the balanced teams approach to build proportional representation and a culture of belonging in the workplace, as well as the balanced teams diversity assessment in the Atlassian team playbook. She works to open source these methods for all practitioners and business leaders and releases thought leadership and tools to create positive change. We'll link to her info in our show notes. And she is an advisor to a variety of groups seeking to build a more just world, including Alia Research and Junco. Her work has been featured in Wired, the Wall Street Journal, the Australian Financial Review, USA Today, Recode, First Round Review, and more. She's also has previous academic affiliations with Stanford and Northwestern, is an appointment of the Equity by Design Lab at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Despite the accolades listed here, she asks that you engage with her in her work to judge her competence. Traditional proxies of merit and/or competence help reinforce the systems that keep incredible people from the opportunities they deserve. Well said. Well, Aubrey, welcome to the show. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you so much. I always feel like that's such a large bio for such a
It's funny when someone reads it to you. I always like, waiting for someone to finish. And they're like, I already know this stuff.
No,
I don't really do all of that.
I think it's also so funny because I think like you can describe people in so many ways, and like a professional bio has a specific function in the world. And I think that always, the way that I describe myself is always so different than like these very sort of constructed things. People ask what I do, and I'm like, I do social justice with capitalism. And kind of in any way that requires that work to be done, I try to go there and see if I can help.
Yeah. I try to give like the 5-year-old definition. What would you tell a kid about what you do?
I try to make the world more fair, or the way I told my dad once is I try to hold the world to higher standards than it holds itself to.
Yeah.
Which feels a little bit enormous for one small human to do, but I really I connected to what you said at the beginning, which is we have to go together,
Yeah.
right? It's not about any single one of us. It's about each one of us taking our own role really seriously and making our own unique contribution to the
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. We're so much stronger together, and we have to lead by example, and we have to bring people into the conversation, which I know is what you do for a living. So, Aubrey, how did you get into this kind of work?
Totally by accident. So I want to first acknowledge that a lot of this work is sort of an extension of the incredible justice and civil rights work that's been done for, decades and centuries. But the sort of corporate incarnation we often call diversity and inclusion, we can go down the rabbit hole of why I absolutely hate the words diversity and inclusion. I think it lets people off the hook, and like clearly it hasn't done a lot. But for me, it came from I sort of grew up being told that like I could do whatever I wanted. And not like in the platitude way, like my parents were like, you can do whatever you want. And I took them super seriously. And as I moved through the world, I realized that folks can't see me right now, but my marginalized identities are often quite invisible. So you might guess that I'm queer, but most people don't guess that I'm Latina and Indigenous and white, because I'm very white passing. Woman, yes, usually people can tell. But so for me, I had this belief that like the world was fair and it was meritocracy, and all of a sudden things happened to me to make it really clear that wasn't true. I think that pivot point, to be a little cute in this moment, is like being at Stanford and seeing how deeply racist the department I was in was. So I watched white male professors steal ideas from Black students. I watched them malign students of color, and I just didn't see a path where I could be successful, despite the fact that the university did have a special program to keep us in. It was clear that the prejudice of the individual professors weren't going to allow us to thrive. So I dropped out, which could be a solution. And I needed a job, so I landed in the tech industry, which for anyone who's like, I want to run away from systemic racism and sexism, like the tech industry probably wouldn't be the first place you go. I didn't know that. It was just, I was in the Bay Area. And the thing that was different was that as I started seeing these same kind of patterns, tech would tell me, we're a meritocracy. Well, I'm, at my basic, competency, a mixed method social scientist. So I love statistics and quantitative, but also think qualitative data is important. And I just said, that's mathematically impossible, and you're data people. Like, it's impossible to be this white and this male and also be a meritocracy. I've run the model, so let's actually fix it. And so I was lucky to get the opportunity. Some leader said, great, test the system, tell us how we should redesign it. And that was kind of the way into the career. And I went into it without knowing about all the other incredible practitioners that are in this space. And then I've been lucky to kind of keep going and get supported as I've gone.
Oh, what a cool backstory. Yeah, finding yourself in a place where like, I thought the world was equal, but this doesn't feel very equal. I definitely can identify with that in my early career too.
And I didn't get it. Like, to me, I was so like naive and like utopian and optimistic. And so now the way I think about it is again, if you espouse the standard that you want to be a meritocracy, that you want to be fair, that you want to hire the best, I'm going to hold you to that standard, which is fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And having the data. I think that's one piece. You mentioned diversity and inclusion. There's no perfect term for this. I get a lot of pushback on my term that I use, allyship, because it's been so misused over the years. And you're right. There's no magic bullet to this. Obviously, D&I has not been something that's worked successfully. And allies, we still have a long way to go there too, and a lot of misunderstandings about what that means. So I love leading with data because it also surprises people. I think a lot of organizations still think like, oh, that's a nice to have. Still think this.
Right. And no, absolutely. I think a lot of people, and I think something really important is I don't want to malign like the incredible work of the justice, like DEI practitioners,
Yep.
right? It's in many times not them. It's actually their leaders refusing to support the work. And so I think it's really important to hold where power and accountability and responsibility lie. But yeah, I'm really grateful for every sort of step that has got us to here. I think my question, and I tend to be very future oriented, is what got us here won't necessarily get us there. And let's start thinking about what the things we need to get done to get there are, so that we can start building them.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I know you built models and tested things. Like, what does work? What is working well that could work in the future? What models do we have? Blueprints for
Yeah,
success?
so I think, and this is really silly. So I talk about what I believe my discipline of equitable design is. And so that's really taking social justice sort of theory and principles, pulling in a little bit of like agile methodology. So like measure, design, execute, like pilot, see if it worked, scale it out if it did, build monitoring systems. And so I think that's it. Like, what works? Funding. Funding.
Wait a second. We have to pay
Empowerment,
for this.
business metrics, firing people. So I think that's the thing, like, and I feel like I sound a little silly when I say it, but my point being that I think what we're seeing now, and what I hope we continue to see, is that, I work in the tech industry. So I think it's fair to say that in certain specialties, there are legitimate market constraints on talent, right? So we as an industry have failed, the number of underrepresented people who have the technical background to be a director of engineering, for example. Sure, that is less, right? I'm not gonna argue with like the basic supply and demand, but at the same time, tech companies are made up of a lot more than software engineers. And And I, as someone who got hired into my first sort of official D&I job with 2 of the 12 requirements, and 8 years less work experience than was required, I think requirements are mostly bullshit. So I think it's really important to show that our failures up to this point to achieve the goals we've set are not about, for the most part, a huge jump forward, or not about a failure of capability, but a failure of will on behalf of those who sort of hold the budgets and make decisions.
Yeah. I like pressure testing those job descriptions, the requirements, what's really required, and asking yourself the question, much like your success, who has been successful here, right? And not just the white male, but who has been successful and why. And you're a great testament to some of the competencies, some of the things that we can train to. A lot of the things that you don't have to arrive day one with 8 years of industry experience and all these
Or
credentials.
we also really devalue expertise that's been gained in non-paid work. So like the most basic example I use is, honestly, running a global P&L or having 3 kids, you're learning the same stakeholder management, time management, and logistics skills. Like literally it's the same set of skills that you're building. And so for us, I think as a hiring community, and I say this, I'm not a recruiter, but I work with really incredible ones, is how do we begin to get more creative about understanding how skills transference works? I think that's a big way that we create
Mhm.
more opportunity for people.
Yep.
Um, like I think, Atlassian hired me as their head of diversity, and I was a former terrorism researcher. So like no one was going to put that on a job description, right? And so I think part of it is also starting to focus on what people can do and what they can create, as opposed to the specific path that they took
Mhm.
to get to that
Yeah.
point of
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah, look for the transferable skills. Look for the things that are really highly valued in that job, right? And making sure you can siphon those out from a lot of different experiences. And having had someone that's done that exact thing before, you're right. In a talent pipeline situation, that's just not realistic to think you're going to find somebody like that. And nor is it super helpful if you want to diversify your workforce. You've got to be willing to look in different places, non-traditional places as well. So it certainly affects women, but a lot of communities that have diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I always teach folks is that when you're thinking about designing for equity, you should always first and always prioritize Black women's experiences. If you can get queer disabled Black women's experiences, like that's the gold standard. And what I mean by that is when you design and consider their experience and how you create a space or an opportunity for them to thrive, which you always need to do with them, right? Not for, but with, you help everybody else. So a lot of times the discussion starts with gender. And what that actually means in practice is straight, white, cisgender, economically privileged women who are like 2 clicks from the CEO or a board member, which doesn't actually equal meaningful change. It doesn't get cognitive diversity, which is sort of like, we talk about this diversity of thought that comes from a highly varied set of life experiences. It's not just like a magical quantity we can make up. And so that's what I always tell people is, if you're starting a program, and this is sort of, folks can keep me honest on this, but it's really how Culture Amp is starting, which is that, sort of I'm 6 months into a new role, have spent a few months looking around, seeing and appreciating the work that's been done there. But for 2020, we actually released, at cultureamp.com/antiracism, our 2020 racism plan. So not a commitment and just a check to Black Lives Matter, but actually a detailed plan about all of the structural and cultural change that we're undergoing internally, to set ourselves up, which includes deep education for our leadership team and leadership layers. So just want to highlight that when you're thinking about doing this, prioritize addressing anti-Blackness and white supremacy within your business operations first. Because as you do that, you get like a 10 for 1, and that the skills that you build as an organization and as individuals addressing that problem are transferable skills that allow you to also address things like ableism and lack of accessibility, or sexism, or transphobia and homophobia, but that skills transference doesn't actually work very well in reverse. So again, by sort of designing for what we think of as those intersectionally marginalized identities, sort of leaning on Kimberly Crenshaw for that theory, we actually bring all boats up together to mix
Yeah.
about 17 metaphors together.
No, that's a good way to look at it, Aubrey. I hadn't thought about it that way because so much think of the challenge with diversity is we tend to isolate the dimensions, right? Well, there's race, and then there's gender, and then there's LGBTQ, then there's disabilities. And I myself on the podcast have kind of approached conversations that way, compartmentalized. And when you get intersectional, like you said with Kimberly Crenshaw's work, when you really address those that are most oppressed, right? When you create a workplace that they belong in, right, with them, to your point, then it works for everybody. And then we're all better off.
Exactly. And so again, I know that it's not the most intuitive frame for people, which is why I say it a lot, is because, but it's not actually a new idea. So if you look at theory around like universal design,
Yep.
for example, this is actually really basic. We've just layered some social identity constructs on top. So universal design would tell us not to think about that sort of small represented case as like the edge case, meaning we don't need design for it. It's not a big deal. Rather, we think about it as the stress case. So like the difficult case that we're designing for. And if we do that, well, the other people who have an easier time are also going to benefit from the changes we've made, right? So we're actually not keeping benefits for one group in the same way we would be. And just to pull one thing, the word diversity, it's related to this, the reason that I don't like to use it, which is one, it's so non-specific as to mean nothing in theory, but also in practice. So in the 2018 Atlassian State of Diversity report, which is still online, that was research that we led. And we measured global attitudes and behaviors around diversity and inclusion. And I included a little bit of a trick question in there to see if this was true, which is, I just asked the question, which of these groups are diverse? Fun fact, I included every identity group we basically had. But overwhelmingly, in the US, but also internationally, we found that the word diversity was associated with two groups, white women and Black Americans. And so what that does is the word allows us to pretend that we're helping Black individuals in the workplace while actually accruing benefits to white women. And the data shows that that's happened. So I call it corporate white feminism. I don't think it's cute. And like in the tech industry, for example, we've seen that since 2014 and sort of reports started coming out, white women have made gains. But Black women's representation has also dropped by more than 13%. And so again, understanding that it's helpful to use specific language. And it's the reason I actually like to talk about balanced teams, because suddenly people say, oh, my team is diverse. And I'm like, well, that's a bunch of economically privileged white women. I'm glad they have opportunities. But now with balance, we can say balanced in what way? Imbalanced in what way? And we can have a more thoughtful, tactical discussion about how to address the issues that are in front of us.
That's so good. And language matters. The words we use matter. And I've struggled with that because right now everybody's struggling to put together their DEI statements. What does diversity mean? Equity mean to us, and inclusion. So part of what you're saying, I'm like, well, we're already woefully behind defining.
Right. And I still use like the word diversity on my website because like SEO is a thing. Like
Right.
to be clear that like I accept that it's like a bridge word we have to keep using so people understand. But like right. So like I'm very a
How do we
practical
get people moving forward? Like you said, you're a futurist.
word. And so what I for folks who are thinking about this, you know, if you don't want to be me and be like, fuck diversity, which occasionally I do say, it's more about what specifically do you mean by that?
Right.
And how
Right.
to articulate it, because often we've been saying diversity, but we have 1,000 different definitions. And so it impedes our ability to go together, as
Yeah.
you said, because we're not sure that we're talking about the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
And we're checking the box, right, for those different dimensions. And there's the big four that are pretty obvious, but I often say that it's really polarizing to the white male, of course, that has his own diversity experiences, maybe not to the same degree, but this isn't a scorecard or a competition, but it's diverse perspectives that we're really talking about here. What perspectives can we bring? Like you said, the lived experiences, the richer, deeper experiences of other people, different types of people are just going to make better decisions, have better ideas.
absolutely. And I think when you say it, I think that this particular point actually helps sort of engage white men who, even those who say have less socioeconomic power or things, like still benefit and are protected by
Sure.
like society in ways that the rest of us aren't. But but creating space for balance and acknowledging that there are different structural oppressions that someone who's a cis white man might experience, it actually is a way to help them understand the concept, right? it makes them like, this is just my experience as a practitioner. Now, I'll be totally honest. I also think there's a lot of work we have to do in helping white men understand that, like, yes, you're going to feel uncomfortable as change happens.
Yeah.
And like, discomfort is not the same thing as harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, and that's a really important thread to pull apart, because if someone's being harmed, we want to stop that. But like, losing your ability to like have low cultural fluency, like I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of white men right now.
Yes.
In a
Yes.
conversation like after Harvey Weinstein, is they're like, well, I'm terrified. Like, I'm constantly thinking about like what I'm saying and how it's going to be perceived. I was like, welcome to be a Latina in senior leadership. And they're like, what? I was like, I just want you to know that's the experience the rest of us have had our entire careers. So I want to sit here and hold space and have compassion for how hard that is for you. But I also want you to understand that you're the only one who didn't have to do that in the first place.
Mm-hmm. It's a good
And
way of saying
so
that.
it can be an empathy generating moment. And for me personally, I think it's important to sort of approach with like deep compassion, but deep compassion doesn't allow people to be their worst selves.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a balance between holding space and saying, all right, now go to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that term, holding space too. So I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier, Aubrey, about anti-racism and the stuff you're working on now with Culture Amp. Tell us more about that, because obviously, huge topic. I hope we keep this conversation going forever, because it's long overdue for white people to wake up to this. I think corporate America is just, I've never seen it in the 6 years that I've been doing this work and in my own corporate experience. I don't know. I've never seen it this strong and in staying strong for this long.
Yeah.
So
I
tell
would
me, what
say,
are you seeing?
I would say my inbox has gotten quieter in the last 2 weeks. So if that's staying power, maybe we need a little juice.
Hopefully we don't need anything negative to happen again, right? For
But
that.
you know what? We're all real tired, and I'm white passing, so I am significantly probably less impacted than, not potentially. I am. Let's be real. I can hide when I want
Yeah,
to.
same here. Yeah.
Um, but no, I think I'm really excited about the heightened focus on the issue. But I think what worries me is most corporates put out kind of a bullshit mealy mouth statement, and it got a tax write off. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
then that's it. Or maybe they said, let's recruit. And like, I feel that I would be committing professional malpractice if I wasn't really honest, which is, if your anti-racism strategy starts with recruiting, you might as well just set money on fire and have a bonfire. Um,
I love that.
because
That's so where people are. I did the
Right. Like,
corporate
you
statement.
can do that. But the other reason I think it's a bad idea, besides I've never seen a company successfully change, like really move the needle by starting with recruiting, is that you're also gaslighting the underrepresented people you're bringing in. The problem with why they're not there is because your culture is harmful to
Right.
underrepresented people. And so updating your career site and saying, we care about diversity, and then asking, in this case, Black folks, or, my community, Latinx folks, or queer folks, or women, or people with disabilities to come into a really shitty culture is harmful to them. And so that really informed how Culture Amp is thinking about our strategy. And so we're actually very intentionally focusing internally.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, cultureamp.com/antiracism, you can see what we're doing, but we've also put resources together to help you. Our mission is to build a better world of work. And as our CEO says, in order to build a better world of work, we have to build a better world. And so we're trying. So first, sort of the first pillar of our program is support.
Mm-hmm.
And that's supporting our Black campers.
Yeah.
Campers are what we call our employees. And so after sort of the video of George Floyd went viral, that meant our leaders making a statement, acknowledging it, giving employees permission to call in Black, off the books. So like, don't log it, just tell your manager and take care of yourself, process what you need to. And then also we brought in a Black mental health specialist to run a special program to make sure not only that our employees were getting supported by their managers and our HR team in the immediate sense, but also that we were making significant investments in their overall wellness and sustainability.
That's so good.
Because even if Culture Amp became perfect tomorrow, they're still stuck in a world that is, we're still stuck in a world that's deeply white supremacist.
I know.
And so that was pillar one. Pillar two was taking accountability. So we held a Juneteenth meeting where our leaders we talked about the history and significance of the day. Our leaders talked about their own failures to prioritize addressing anti-Blackness. And then we also released this comprehensive plan, sort of brought them, which includes a requirement that all of our directors and above actually have anti-racism development goals to which they are held accountable. And then we also released the metrics that we use to judge success of the program. And those metrics only consider the experience and opinions of our Black employees. Because the fact is, those of us who are not Black, it is not our job to judge whether our work is done correctly. It is to do our work and take feedback until it is judged to be correct by the people we're attempting to support.
I love that. I love that. When you mentioned deep education before too. So the big
that's pillar 3.
Right. Well, so I think the big mistakes for our listeners, you probably did the corporate statement. Maybe you had an all-employee meeting.
We actually did make a statement in which we outlined our immediate actions and then also said we will come back to you in a couple of the full corporate level plan,
key point right there. There's
so statements are okay, but they need to actually be followed up with something. Otherwise, basically the statement is just to make white people feel better about not doing anything.
Right. Well, that's the problem. So corporate statement, check. Then it was, I'm going to make some sort of donation, right, to some organization that's for African American.
And donations are great, but they're insufficient to solve
right.
the white supremacy that your company is. It
doesn't address systemic challenges usually. Yeah. And then step 3 was some sort of listening session, all-employee session. So now what I'm finding with my clients this fall is, well, what do we do now? We said we were going to do stuff. And I'm like, deep education, awareness training, getting people to understand.
And not unconscious bias training. Like, this is the thing that I'm really grateful. I mean, you're on this train, right? Which is, I have this beauty of openness right now. I say it was never unconscious bias. It was your conscious decisions. And they're like, what? I'm like, no. Your conscious decisions. Remember how you insist on hiring people from Stanford? I went there. I feel like I can say that.
Right.
Right? Like, that's not an indicator that someone's brilliant. Just so you know, I went there, I checked. Lots of smart people, lots of meh people. And so, but yeah, I think the thing is you need to lean into education. Like, a really fantastic activist was teaching me this idea that sometimes people rush to action because they're trying to avoid the discomfort. And the fact is that sitting in your own discomfort is a part of the work. So understanding, why have you ignored this before? Why haven't you done something? And be really deeply, painfully honest with yourself about why that is. Sometimes the answer is, my privilege feels nice.
Yeah, it's comfortable staying this way.
And so at Culture Imp, we're taking that education really seriously. So all of our executive team is doing a deep 4-month anti-racism coaching program that involves both a group curriculum as well as individual learning journeys.
Oh, cool.
Being mindful that we do have executives from all over the world, so we're trying to teach them about anti-Blackness in their specific context. Like I said, all of our directors and above, we're working on rolling out a program of anti-racism development goals and giving them a library of learning paths to follow along that. We also are offering a broad-based film and media-based anti-racism education program for all of our employees. And then we have the community running White Allies and non-Black POC allies reading groups for more tactical. So there's that. And then there's sort of this last piece of our puzzle, which I want to highlight, which is that the last pillar is opening up access. So what we know is that often career progression is hindered when how to get ahead is sort of siloed. And so our IT team is actually leading a large-scale project across the entire organization to examine our knowledge management practices and productivity tools, to refactor how we as a company store and share information, to make sure that all people are given all of the information they need to do their work and to grow in their career. The HR team is looking at every process and making sure everything is clearly documented and shared. We're implementing more rigorous equity audits for each of our talent processes as they run this year. And then very last on the program, we are redesigning our global recruiting process from the ground up. But again, I emphasize, it is the last item on the list. So, and
Well,
that's
it,
a 6 month plan.
exactly.
So, and our plan is that sort of it'll be 6 months in January. Our commitment is that we will be providing an update in January on how we've gone, how we've executed programs, and sort of whether we've met our sort of core metrics that we
Hmm.
set.
That's a great example, Aubrey. Great blueprint for our listeners to follow. You don't
Oh,
have to do all of that, but what a menu to choose from.
yeah, and like I said, please learn from us. The reason we're being so public is not only because we think it's the right thing to do, but because you know, companies around the world rely on Culture Amp to help listen to their employees. And we are leveraging our tools, right, to listen, but also to use our engagement platform to hold ourselves accountable for changes and sort of what we're doing as a part of that listening.
Hmm.
And using our continuous feedback tools and our performance to make sure that we have a fair and equitable performance process and that people are getting the kind of feedback that helps them grow, not just the stuff that's steeped in the isms. Um, and so,
Hmm.
for us, we hope that not only we can, as a company and how we built the company, contribute something of what we can, but also, for me, that's a part of our business is
Hmm.
how do we make a better world of work? We can't make a better world of work unless we make it a better world of work for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to work for everybody. Oh, that's so good. Well, I'm so glad you have the accountability piece at 6 months to check in too. And I think a lot of corporations that are leading inclusively right now that will be able to be relevant with future employees and customer needs are doing this hard work, and they have a long-term roadmap to get this done. They realize centuries of inequality will not be undone in one fatal swoop corporate statement, right? And that's why it's so triggering, I think, for those that have been marginalized. Like, come on, are you serious? It doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel authentic. So doing
We've
the
all
hard
seen it
work,
before.
right?
I think I feel really lucky that our CEO and our founders have frankly just leaned into the work. So something that Didier said, and I've shared with our Black campers is, just to be clear, I don't expect you to trust us. There's no reason you should. We
Hmm.
have to earn that. And here's the plan about how we're going to try. But trust is earned, and I think most underrepresented people, like, the promises are there. You've made the promises. You say you're going to do this. You say that you're going to achieve goals. And one of the things that's been really helpful to me, and because I also coach leaders in thinking about growing in their inclusion, and the one thing I always tell people is stop saying that you care about D&I.
Hmm.
Tell me what you are doing, the
Yeah.
time and resources you've
Show
allocated,
me.
because the fact is your care doesn't matter if it's not enough of a priority for you to take action.
Hmm.
Um, because at the end of the day, you care. A lot of times what I see is that we say we care because we feel bad about ourselves if we don't. And so we give ourselves the credit for caring without actually helping the people we say we care about. And so I think it's really important for us as leaders, when we say we care about something, to quantify that. And so
Hmm.
I say, is it in your top 3 priorities? What actions have you taken today? Or what actions have you taken this week?
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not going to judge you. Like, I don't find that a particularly useful coaching technique, but I'm going to say, that doesn't sound like care to me, right? You're a very smart, competent person. And if you said to your boss, oh, yeah, it's important to me, but I haven't done anything on it, would that work in any other realm? Why do you have lower standards for this work than other work?
That's a really good point. Oh, so good, Aubrey. I love all the really nice truth telling that you've had for us. All these learning principles rooted in research, in practice, that what you've led with organizations. So tell our listeners how they can stay in touch with you. You mentioned the website that we'll link to for the anti-racism work that you're
Yeah.
doing right now. But what else? How can they follow you?
Yeah, so you can follow me. My digital soapbox is I'm at AD Blanche on Twitter. You can get at me on LinkedIn. Those are like the 2 social platforms I'm on a ton. I'm also on Instagram, but it's mostly just photos of my dog. Um, but yeah, Twitter is great. And then you can always drop me a line at aubreyblanche.com. There's a little form there, and you can get to me. But like I said, my hope, if you can't see me, my fingers are crossed, is that you hear these ideas, and rather than sort of shouting me out or Culture Amp out, that you go and you think about if there's something we've done that's inspired you, if there's a
Mm.
benefit of that, share it with someone who can benefit from it, and then think about how you can replicate that impact today and tomorrow and every day going forward.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. So much good information there, Aubrey. Well, thank you for joining us today. And we'll be sure to link to those in the show notes.
Thank you so much for having me and for all the work you're doing to shine a light on this work.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button and connect with us on LinkedIn. You can search for Aubrey and I there. You can also share this episode anywhere you get podcasts. Every review helps other allies find this. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.